The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org with Global Alert News for January 2nd, 2016. For those that have survived the last year in the asylum, we are entering a new year. We'll see how far we get without some very large shoes dropping, without links in the chain of the paradigm we have known beginning to fall apart. It's already happening, and still most are oblivious. A lot of ground to try to cover today. My gratitude to KQMS for allowing this show. We will try to keep this show on the air as long as we can through GeoEngineeringWatch.org. We keep it commercial free so that the message is not tainted and so we can get out as much data as possible. On a side note, every single day when I wake up, again, I remind myself of the battle at hand, that the greatest imperative we face is to expose the insanity that's put the human race on a certain course of near-term total extinction. In this regard, contrary to what many would like to believe, it's not just the global elite who are responsible for the dark scenario we now face. It's also the actions or inactions of a completely careless and willfully blind population, or rather populations all over the globe. All of those that would rather golf, go on cruises, spend the weekend sitting on the couch with a six-pack and a bag of chips while viewing the latest stage playoff sports game, all bear responsibility for the dark horizon that's before us. For those that are awake and trying with all their strength to sound the alarm, it's easy to feel that you're between the hammer and the anvil. The hammer of a clinically insane and immensely powerful global elite, and the anvil of a population that does not want to wake up. So those that are already awake can certainly feel they're between the hammer and the anvil with no way out. For those who feel this, I would say, don't lose heart. We must not give up. If you're doing your absolute best for the common good, you're on the right track. And never underestimate the effect you will have from the seeds of awareness you have sown as people are forced to wake up. And they will be soon. Given all the challenges faced by the human race at the current moment in time, what can make one's life still meaningful? We'll get on to the news stories in a moment. A lot of hard-hitting data to cover. Too much even in this hour. But what makes life still worth living? And a lot of things haven't changed over the course of millennia. Here's a quote from 2,000 years ago from the Stoic philosopher Seneca. This is timeless wisdom of which there is much of, but few seem to seek it because they're too distracted with their iPhones and their other personal pursuits of pleasure. But this is the kind of basis that life can be meaningful under any circumstances. Seneca said this 2,000 years ago. What prevents us from saying that a good and meaningful life is to have a mind that is free, fearless, and steadfast, a mind that is placed beyond the reach of fear, beyond the reach of desire, that counts virtue as the only good, baseness the only evil, and all else but a worthless mass of things which come and go without increasing or diminishing the highest good, which is to preserve our morality at all costs. What greater purpose could any of us have than to dedicate ourselves wholly to the fight for the greater good? The Seneca quote is over. This is simply my perspective on that. No matter what we face, no matter how daunting the challenge, it is our philosophy and faith that can fortify us against the gathering storm. All we're responsible for, any of us, is the correct use of our own will. That's all. We have been trained to forget that and to somehow think that meaning in life can only be achieved if you have enough stuff or if you feel secure enough with your retirement account or your new car or your paid off home, or none of that matters. None of that matters in the end. What matters is what part you play in the battle for the common good. Now, again, we've been trained and pushed to forget that, distracted by mainstream media. Here's a few mainstream media headlines of total idiocracy, just to remind us every week of how ridiculous the scenario we face is. Then we'll get on to a lot of the weather disruptions around the globe. We have unprecedented conditions in the Arctic, North Pole, East Coast, South Africa, all over the globe. And we have a ramping up of the chess pieces being put in place toward World War III. Let's get to that in a minute. First, a few of the distraction headlines from mainstream media. NFLer fined for watching daughter perform at halftime. Just want to point out how ridiculous the distractions are every week to remind us. For those that don't watch mainstream TV, I make myself, by the way, I make myself watch mainstream TV periodically so I can see what populations are being fed, how ridiculous the narrative is. Hoverboard 1, Mike Tyson 0. What does that mean? Mike Tyson fell off a hoverboard? Does that matter at all? Two more. Palin gets revenge on Faye. I guess Sarah Palin gets revenge on Tina Fey. I mean, why would this have any bearing on anything? This is mainstream media headline. Last headline, sustainable sex products for the future. That's important. We won't have a planet for the future, but I guess we'll have that headline to go on. And by the way, for Fox News, and I'm not picking on Fox because they're all bad. They're all bad. And it's amazing how many people I hear tell me, if you want real news, go to Fox. What planet are they living on? Fox isn't real news. Fox is propaganda. So is CNN. So is MSNBC. This is simply different sides to the same coin. And there's an example of that. Fox News gave their 10 top news stories of 2015. What wasn't in that list of stories? How about these few points? We're in the sixth great mass extinction. The biosphere is imploding. Oceans are dying. 36 countries around the globe are descending into chaos. I could go on and on. Ozone layer is completely shredded and destroyed. What does it take to wake people up? And this is their top 10 stories with total omission, yet again, of the disintegrating life support systems on our planet. What aren't they telling us? What aren't they telling us? Something to always keep in the forefront of our minds. Those in power, starting with the criminal cabal that masquerades as our own government, have us all by the throat. It's time to wake up to that fact. The greatest of all examples is occurring in our skies day in and day out. Keep this in mind. Every single breath we take is laden with the highly toxic elements being sprayed from jet aircraft as part of the global climate engineering operations. Though, of course, there's in reality many more agendas connected to the ongoing aerosol spraying. Many people don't realize this. It's not just climate modification. There's over-the-horizon radar. There's DARPA weapons. These are electromagnetic pulse weapons, offensive and defensive. The atmosphere needs to be electrically conductive for those weapons. So many things going on in our skies while populations are completely and totally oblivious, while the environment dies around them. On top of all other sources of damage to the climate and the biosphere as a whole, the unimaginably massive climate engineering programs are being conducted in plain sight. As I've stated so many times before, I fully realize that many listen to this message and roll their eyes, walk away, retreating into some dark corner of total denial. Many who have not done a bit of actual research, many that go about their lives with ideology as their primary guide, ideology as the lens through which they view the world. That is not a clear lens. As I've also stated countless times to such people, wake up. Your denial won't save you. Your denial won't save you from all that is now unfolding at absolutely blinding speed. As the proverb goes, you can't wake one that is pretending to be asleep. I hear from so many people that are so frustrated with their family, their friends, who refuse to look at data, who simply parrot the official narrative about everything. This narrative from mainstream media, which I just repeated because they don't want to wake up, because their denial feels good to them. It's easier for them not to face reality, but that's a coward's way out. And that's a way out that leads to a dead end. It's not a way out at all, in fact. To those that don't believe things are as serious as I have tried to say repeatedly for years that they are, for those that don't believe this, you will. Again, wait and see. Here's some real headlines. Something I want to mention, too. We see this a lot on financial channels, that everything would be fine if we just had precious metals-backed currencies. Can you eat those metals? Can those metals again restore the planet's ability to support life? It means nothing. The current paradigm of economic growth, expansion, the military-industrial complex paradigm, military-industrial societal paradigm, is crashing. This was inevitable from the start because it was never sustainable. So precious metal-backed currencies mean nothing. And for those on financial channels that say this such and such is going to happen in 10 years and 20 years, they have no clue. They have absolutely no clue because they're completely omitting and ignoring the fact that we're on the fast track to a planet that won't support life. So how can all their projections matter? They look at graphs going backward and somehow pretend that graph has a life going forward, which is absolutely ludicrous. A few other headlines, just to make clear the facade of the expanding economy, which is complete nonsense, as truly it's screeching to a halt. Pemex, which is the Mexican petroleum company, to announce job cuts with oil output at 25-year low. Drug resistance deadlier than cancer by 2050. Of course, the 2050 headline, again, it doesn't matter. We're not going to reach 2050 in this paradigm, or 2040, or 2030, or 2020. These headlines mean nothing, but people feel secure when they look at headlines like this because they feel if the, quote, experts believe that we have that long to face a certain problem, then they can go back to sleep for a while. It's not true, but they tell themselves that. In regard to the petroleum issue, another headline, Calgary woes spread as oil patch spending cuts deepen in 2016. The shale oils, the tar sands, all are crashing because it takes too much money to extract that resource. And in regard to the tar sands, by the way, and this shows the ridiculousness of modern industrial society, they are an energy net negative. What does that mean? It means it takes more energy to extract and utilize that energy than the end product they end up with. It takes about 1.4 units of energy to extract 1 unit of energy from the tar sands. They're simply creating an energy conversion at a net loss. They have an excess of natural gas. They're trying to create oil for hydrocarbon, for vehicle propulsion from the tar sands, so they use their natural gas to extract the oil from the tar sands at a net loss. How much sense does that make? How much sense does that make at all? In the meantime, what's happening to the planet by utilizing fossil fuels? A lot of people don't want to face this. We hear so many people that seem to shrug off CO2 as such a wonderful thing, the more the better. Go to Venus and see how that feels. Ask the oceans how that feels. Are the oceans really enjoying the excess CO2? No. They're dying because they're too acidic now. No oceans, no life on Earth. People are looking through tunnel vision colored lenses in so many cases. CO2 is necessary, absolutely. But not in the quantities we have and not at the speed that it's developing. There's a lot of other aspects to the equation too. To extract these hydrocarbons, whole swaths of the planet are being literally destroyed forever. Ask the Gulf of Mexico how much it likes the oil. Not so much. Or the tar sands in Canada. And what about Beijing? Beijing raises, another headline, Beijing raises smog alert as airport cancels 227 departures. They can't even see down the street in Beijing. They're choking, hacking. They're shutting down schools, factories. You can't continually pollute your own habitation and survive. You can't. You can't do it. One more headline from Smithsonian that I may have touched on last week, but I want to bring this up again. Smithsonian, I encourage anybody to look this up. Smithsonian brought up an article that contrails are accidentally creating geoengineering. How big does the elephant in the room have to get that Smithsonian has to dance around the issue that's obviously going on in our skies? I encourage anybody to look at this article and try to take it seriously when you can't, because clearly they're omitting the truth on this article and trying to dance around the issue again. So we have mainstream sources like Smithsonian now trying to paint this issue as something other than it is, like it's some sort of accident, when we have so much data to prove that climate engineering has been going on for 70 years at a significant scale. We have congressional documents to prove it. We have film footage of these tankers spraying. We have lab tests from all over the globe proving the heavy metals used in climate engineering patents are raining down on us in absolutely unimaginable quantities. We see everything we would expect to see: human health effects, environmental soils toxicity, contaminated water, bees dying from aluminum exposure. Again, I've stated, people listening, look that up. Just search bees/aluminum, and you'll find peer-reviewed studies. The bees are dying from symptoms resembling Alzheimer's and dementia. They're dying all over the globe from this. It's not just the farm chemicals, as so many in denial would like to believe. It's a much, much bigger issue. And it's not just killing the bees, it's killing us. And no matter how much you deny it, no matter how much certain people deny it, it will not change reality. What about the weather? As all this goes on, again, this affects us more than any other issue. It affects, as I said, the air we breathe, our waters, our soils, our weather. So who is hiding this? So many can't believe that something this big could be hidden in plain sight, but it has been. It still is being hidden. And it's easy to hide things, by the way, when you have a population that doesn't want to know the truth to begin with, as I mentioned earlier. It's not just the global elite and what they're doing that created the very dark corner we now find ourselves in. It's a population that doesn't want to know the truth. So all you have to have is weather disseminating agencies to lie about reality, which the population wants to believe anyway. They want to believe the lie. So they create theater. After the record warm temperatures on the East Coast, we had record warm temperatures at the North Pole during the last week in December, about 75 degrees above normal. 75 degrees. This is uncharted territory. Nobody's talking about that, not in the Weather Channel or some of the other global power structure-owned entities. Rather, they put out things like Winter Storm Goliath. That's the name Winter Storm. And all these winter storms have very theatrical names to make them sound very ferocious. And that's what they focus on. Some of the chemically nucleated snows from their chemically nucleated jet stream manipulated cooldowns in order to further confuse a population that really wants to be confused to begin with in many ways. And I'm not speaking to everybody, because I know there's a lot of people who are trying to find the truth and trying to wake up. But there's a whole lot more that don't want anything to do with the truth yet. So we have Winter Storm Goliath. In spite of record warm temperatures in so many places around the globe, we have weather whiplash happening as they radically cool down areas that just experienced record highs. We have ice storms because we have winter storms being created from moisture being pumped out of the Gulf of Mexico. Since when do winter storms originate in the Gulf of Mexico? And in between the warm moisture and the core of the chemically nucleated engineered cool down, we have an ice storm zone where we have a massive buildup of ice. This is now the norm. It's now become the norm. We should normally, historically, have cooler temperatures and then it snows. Now, often, not always, but often, we have snow and then the temperatures cool down. Doesn't anybody remember what order this should be in? It snowed here at my location on the east side of Lake Shasta at 47 degrees a week and a half ago. I mentioned on last week's show. Had it happen again a few days ago, 42, 43 degrees. Snow starts falling again, and all you can hear overhead is aircraft. Now, again, the job of the Weather Channel is to trumpet the desired headlines of the climate engineers. Who owns the Weather Channel? Think about this again. Globalist corporations like Bain Capital, Blackstone, so forth. Who owns Climate Corp? This is a weather broadcasting entity that was purchased by Monsanto for $970 million. Monsanto owns them. How could a weather forecasting agency be worth almost $1 billion? Because Monsanto and the rest of the global elite need to control the message in regard to the weather. Their job, these corporations, is to cover the tracks of the geoengineering assault on planet Earth. That's their job. They have paid liars that masquerade as meteorologists. These people are lying for a paycheck and a pension. How in the world do they look their children in the eyes? I don't know. I truly don't know, because I couldn't. I absolutely couldn't. We also have Weather Central, owned by the Rothschilds. Again, just one more example. Now, I want to read a statement from someone named Matt Anderson, and this was sent to me. He's a former executive advisor from an aerospace and defense company, Booz Allen Hamilton, Chicago. Mr. Hamilton says this: few in the civil sector fully understand that geoengineering is primarily a military science and has nothing to do with lowering carbon emissions. While seemingly fantastical, weather has been weaponized. At least 4 countries, and we know there's many more countries from the congressional documents we have, but this is simply Mr. Anderson's perspective. The U.S., Russia, China, and Israel possess the technology and organization to regularly alter weather for various military and black operations, which are tied to secondary objectives, including demographic, energy, and agricultural resource management. Who gave them the right? Who gives the leaders of these countries the right to decide where it rains, where it doesn't, how toxic that rain is, who gets slaughtered by a natural event, quote-unquote natural, that's been engineered? They are able to carry this out because we have populations, again, that are not willing to look at the facts. They're not willing to look at the truth. They simply want to be entertained and kept comfortable. Continuing with this report, indeed, says Matt Anderson, again, former executive from aerospace defense contractor Booz Allen Hamilton. He says, indeed, warfare now includes the technological ability to induce, enhance, or direct cyclonic events, i.e. hurricanes, drought, flooding, including the polymerized aerosol viral agents and radioactive particulates carried through the global weather system, to weaponize all of this. Think about that. Various themes, the report continues, in public debate, including global warming, have unfortunately been subsumed into a much larger military and commercial objective that have nothing to do with broad public environmental concerns. Doesn't mean the planet's not in meltdown, because it is. But what this is stating is that what they're doing has no benevolent motive. We have always stated that clearly. Climate engineering is about power and control. Their attempt to cool down certain regions is not about anything for the common good. Those cool downs are highly toxic and do an immense amount of damage overall. The chemically nucleating materials can burn the foliage on plants. They're toxic to soils, to waters, to us. This is being done to keep the population confused, incoherent, and unable to figure out what's really happening around them in the climate, largely because they're not really doing any research. But we have had some, as this letter from this former aerospace and defense executive has stated, to at least shine some light on what's happening in our skies. The bottom line is this: it's all malevolent in nature. It is not for the common good. These programs that are happening in our skies are about power and control, period. What does the power structure do when they run out of options? Again, a quick update on the Islamic State terrorism that we have being continued to be fueled and propagated. And let's connect these dots with who's benefiting exactly and why this is going on. Now, America's Muslims have been demonized, of course, as the enemy within. However, there's an entity that supports the Islamic State from inside the United States. And this is the omnipotent U.S. oligarchs and financial elites. Author Caleb Maupin has penned this report. Wall Street tycoons pursue their own vested interests in Syria and Iraq. New York-based political analyst, again, Caleb Maupin notes, As ISIS grows stronger, their profits increase. What is the source of ISIS weaponry? Like all other anti-government terrorist groups in Syria, ISIS has received a steady flow of weapons from the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar. These countries are absolute monarchies propped up by ExxonMobil and other powerful U.S. oil corporations. Again, these are the same corporations that are involved with climate engineering, with the military-industrial complex. They are all one and the same. The report continues, the political analyst emphasizes that a large percentage of the social media which is actively supporting ISIS originates within Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Again, monarchies supported by the United States. We don't hear much about the fight for freedom and democracy there, do we? No, we don't. Because those countries are willing to toe the line for the U.S. They're willing to do whatever the U.S. wishes them to do. And the NATO powers as well. This report continues. The Wall Street oil plantations, also known as the Gulf states, have been pouring weapons into Syria, as many of their poorest countries are unemployed as a result of the oil price drop, find their way into ISIS. Although Saudi Arabia cannot boast a large army, it has the fourth largest military budget in the world. It has been purchasing weapons exclusively from the United States. Let's think about that. Saudi Arabia, who beheads their citizens, as I've mentioned in the past, hangs them from cranes or other structures, sometimes for crimes like speaking out against the monarchy, and we don't hear anything about it. And how much weapons has Washington sold Saudi Arabia? One contract in 2010 was for over $60 billion. $60 billion. This is what it's about. As the planet sinks, as the biosphere implodes, it's about more. More weapons, more armaments, more power, more control. That's what it's about. And if it continues on this path, all of us lose. Who's making money off this kind of interaction? How about U.S. military contractors like General Electric, Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon? All of these U.S. defense contractors are part and parcel to climate engineering, to the wars of aggression overseas. And what part did they play in events like 9/11? Or, for example, the French terrorist attacks? What part do these companies have behind the scenes? Shouldn't we ask? When each of these events fueled massive arms sales around the globe, absolutely immense amounts of weaponry being sold to countries that are dictatorships and monarchies that we don't hear about, that our media doesn't talk about while they're demonizing Assad. We don't hear Fox News or CNN or MSNBC saying a word about Saudi Arabia or Bahrain or the rest who are brutally suppressing their citizens. We don't hear a word about them because they're buying lots of our weapons. And with Saudi Arabia, again, how much mainstream media coverage did we have of the fact that 100 of their Saudi nationalists were sent back on a plane immediately after 9/11 with no interrogation whatsoever, no questions asked, while no one else was able or allowed to fly? We don't hear anything about that. Nothing. The American population needs to wake up and understand that they are helping with the demise of the planet, with societal structure, and with the fueling and propagating of total tyranny by their ambivalence, their absolute ambivalence toward everything that's happening around us. If we look again, one more look back at 9/11, ask yourself this again. This is an event on which so much has been triggered. Ask yourself if you really believe that those attacks could have been carried out by a diabetic Arab in a cave in Afghanistan against the most powerful military in the country. And ask yourself, if people didn't know on the inside, why did we have the put options, which are basically betting on a loss, put against United Airlines right before the attack? Somebody knew it was coming. Why did we have Larry Silverstein, the owner of the World Trade Center complex? Why did he pull insurance policies for the World Trade Complex weeks prior to the attacks that contained provisions that paid double for terrorism? These people knew. How many people are on the inside profiting off all these atrocities? And let's look at Bush again on 9/11. Look at Bush when he was in front of these kids speaking about goats or whatever story he was talking about. I think it was something along those lines. He looked like a deer in the headlights when he was told what happened. And he stands there for how long? You can't tell me he didn't know exactly what was happening. Can't tell me that. And let's look at the Bush-Gore election. Let's carry it back a little further. Bush had to win the 2000 election. The power structure had to make sure he won because he was a part of the entire scenario that has played out since. I do not care for Al Gore at all. It's not about Al Gore or that he should have won. It's simply about who was the primary actor for the power structure, and it happened to be Bush at that time. Now it's Obama. There's no difference between the two. But think back about the fiasco of the 2000 election. They had to put Bush in because he was a part of what was being staged or planned and orchestrated. They had to have him in the driver's seat. And look at his behavior again and ask yourself all the questions about Bush and Cheney that they would not allow any questions to be taped, recorded, notes being taken, or any questioning of either one of them. No investigation for almost a year and a half after 9/11 happened. I mean, when will people wake up? Let's take a look back. I want to look a little more on the Bush family history. And I've mentioned before that Prescott Bush was directly involved with the financing of the Third Reich. But I was sent a piece by a former Marine Corps veteran named Douglas Yates from Alaska. He's a solid patriot that's done his best to sound the alarm. Again, former veteran. And Douglas pinned this report from him. Bush family history shows a dark past unseen by most. Here's the report from former Marine Corps veteran again, Douglas Yates. Few would argue that trust, like democracy, is earned and not inherited. So how is it that we've missed the lessons of 4 generations of Bush family history? And again, I'm not separating the Obamas and their part in this. They're as guilty as all the rest, Clinton and everybody else down the line. But Bushes go back a long way, and they have a very dark history indeed. So let's look at that history. As Kevin Phillips recounts in American Dynasty, the Bush family presents a record of war profiteers who used public office to gain wealth and advantage. Along the way, Bush family business cronies received political access and legitimacy. One of the most venal characters is Prescott Bush, the president's grandfather. In 1942, Congress seized the assets of Prescott Bush and charged him with trading with the enemy. Bush and his father-in-law, George Herbert Walker, again, this is a very incest sort of power cabal. Not just Bushes, all of them are all connected in some way or another. We have a global power structure, and those who don't believe it have simply not done the research. So Bush and his father-in-law, George Herbert Walker, were managing directors of the Union Banking Corporation of New York City, allied with Brown Brothers Harriman, the largest private investment bank in the world. Bush and Walker were frontmen for Nazi industrialist Fritz Thyssen. Thyssen, whose empire was founded on coal and steel, financed the rise of Adolf Hitler. Then as now, cloaking funds destined for subversion of democracies or weapons shipments was a useful tactic. To hide transactions and conceal ownership, Thyssen created a banking network. The first node was established in Berlin, a second in Holland. UBC in New York was the linchpin. Little more than a money laundering office for Nazi operations in the United States, Bush, Walker, and other Confederates oversaw almost a dozen separate businesses acting with Thyssen's money. They aided the Nazi invasion of Europe by supplying resources for weaponry. In 1937, Bush set up a deal to help the Luftwaffe obtain tetrathyl lead to boost aircraft performance, helping the Third Reich all the way along. Think about this. How many people know this? How many people know this history? And I challenge anybody who disputes this to do their own research. This is there. I've looked at the congressional documents on the hearings for Prescott Bush. This is real. This report continues. Americans first heard about Thyssen's American operations in New York Herald Tribune on July 30th, 1942, 8 months after Pearl Harbor. The headline declared, quote, Hitler's angel has $3 million in U.S. bank. However, the story did not identify Bush or Harriman as UBC executives. After the war ended in 1945, investigators learned that Bush had extremely close ties to Thyssen and continued to work as his agent to the end. When hostilities ceased, Bush helped move Thyssen's assets to Panama, Argentina, and Brazil, all major destinations for the flight of the Nazi capital. In 1951, following Thyssen's death, Argentina and the U.S. alien property custodian released the assets of Union Banking Corp. Prescott Bush cashed out his ownership share for $1.5 million, which is about $10 million in today's dollars. He used it to fund a successful U.S. Senate campaign from Connecticut to launch his son, the president's father, in the oil business. This is what goes on in U.S. history. This is business as usual. And the American public have no clue. They have absolutely no clue what's gone on in their past, because history is written by the victor. Remember that. History is written by the victor. So we have Americans running around pretending they're, quote, patriotic, ranting about how wonderful Bush was, or how wonderful Obama is, or Clinton's, or we could go all the way back. Reagan. It doesn't matter. These are all actors in a play. That's all they are. And what do we have on TV now? Repetitively, constantly. Political theater that is so far beyond absurd, you couldn't make it up if you tried. And these daily bouts and banters and feuds between all the candidates to keep the American population entertained while the world on which their lives and their children's lives depend is plundered to death, literally. Arms being manufactured and sold, countries that are total tyrannical monarchies being armed to the teeth, gearing up for the final global conflict, which is the last card the power structure has to play. I want to finish this report from Douglas Yates because it was really, really well written. So, other American companies that armed Hitler included General Motors, Standard Oil, Chase Bank, and all were quietly sanctioned after Pearl Harbor. Then the government files were lost or forgotten. What about 9/11? Does anybody know that Building 7 contained so many investigations, including Enron and the rest, and it all went up in smoke when that building collapsed in free fall speed from some, we are told, from some furniture burning on the first floor? What does it take to wake the American population up? The report continues, for 60 years, the full record of Prescott Bush's complicity in the Nazi war machine has been ignored or denied by participants and U.S. media. But no more. Documents relating to the seizures were recently uncovered in the National Archives and the Library of Congress, confirmed by Dutch government sources. They show that Bush shipped tons of strategic resources to the Third Reich as Hitler prepared to invade Poland. So we have Granddad Bush, Prescott Bush, assisting the buildup of Nazi resources and weaponry to start World War II. And now we're heading toward World War III. And all these players are still working behind the scenes. Who's running right now? Another Bush. Another Bush. We've already had Daddy and Junior, and now we're going to have another Bush. And people in the U.S. pretend this is a democracy, and we have husband and wife, Bill Clinton, and now we're forced to face Hillary Clinton, and we call this a democracy. Nobody related to anybody who's ever held an office should be allowed to run for office. Shouldn't be allowed. This is a total facade. So now we're faced with another Bush as we build up toward World War III. And again, it doesn't matter if it's Bush, Clinton. It doesn't matter. It's the same power structure. And those who don't get it yet are not looking very close. Final paragraphs in this report from Douglas Yates. After launching a bloody occupation of Iraq, perhaps it's time Americans connect the dots and see the big picture. Yes, it is about time. It ought to have been done before the invasion, but since we're trained to accept media, TV dinners, uncritically developing in a context for identifying domestic enemies is a challenge. Rhetoric and flag-waving have replaced hard-nosed insistence on truth. Meanwhile, lies send our troops to die. From home, war profits flow to favored industries in billion-dollar contracts. In private action and public policy, Bush family history reveals a pattern of war profiteering spanning 4 generations. It's a legacy of deceit and death. For the naive and uninformed, the facts may be a slap in the face. For those who look closely, the sign is as clear as blood on snow. Final paragraph. Then again, perhaps the pattern is lost in the noise. According to Bob Woodward's Bush at War, the president attended a New York Yankees game not long after 9/11 attacks, wearing a New York City fireman's jacket. Bush threw out the first pitch, and the crowd roared its approval. From a skybox above the stadium, Karl Rove, Bush's political advisor, likened the roar to the crowd of a, quote, Nazi rally. A little irony with that one. And let's consider it. I don't know how many have seen this, but after the invasion of Iraq, George Bush did a video that was so horrible that I can't imagine people weren't outraged beyond comprehension. He did a skit of him looking through his office for, quote, weapons of mass destruction that weren't there, as if it was a big joke that we went to war in Iraq and there was no weapons of mass destruction. And he did a comedy skit, literally, looking through his office and not finding any weapons of mass destruction, as if it was a big joke. Is it a joke to our military brothers and sisters that are missing their arms and legs, or that are dead with their orphaned children, widowed wives? Is that a joke? Anybody who sees this video, if they're not outraged, you have no sense of justice. You can find this online. But this is what we face. And it's no different with the Obamas. It's no different. In fact, we posted on Wednesday the 29th, it's on GeoEngineeringWatch.org, a very revealing video by Dan Schultz of some of the current hypocrisies that have been thrown at us from the Obama family. These are all simply actors in a play. So, at this juncture in time, as we enter yet another year with conditions looking darker than they ever have in the history of the human race, much darker, it's an unfortunate fact that most turn away from unpleasant or painful truths. But I want to ask this question. What happens when we feel no pain? What happens when we try to hide and ignore painful realities? Is pain a benefit to the human body? Let's take this example. There are people that are born without the sensation of pain. Is that a good thing for them? In fact, many of them don't survive because they can't tell when they're harming themselves. Pain is necessary. Pain is a part of being able to change course, to understand you're doing the wrong thing. If you put your hand on a burning stove and you feel no pain, is that helping you? I don't think so. Is it any different when people do everything they can to hide from reality, to hide from painful realities? What's the end result? Is it good or bad for them, for the human race, for their children? It's the same metaphor. To be able to face hard, painful realities is the only way forward. It's the only way forward. And in fact, as I've quoted before from renowned psychologist Scott Peck, who said, the hallmark of a healthy mind is an unyielding willingness to face the truth, no matter how dire or painful. That's a healthy mind. Denial is not the sign of a healthy mind. Freedom and democracy, I truly wish this was a reality, that our military was pursuing freedom and democracy. around the world. But this couldn't be further from the truth. And I again state my most sincere appeal to our brothers and sisters in the military to take a good, long look in the mirror and ask yourself if you have truly tried to find out what's going on around you in the world and what part you are playing for those in power who don't give a damn about America or any other country. Those in power that are driven only by their lust for ever more power and control. The epitome of their lust for more power is the attempt to play God with the planet's climate and life support systems. To those in our military, again, you have a responsibility to uphold the Constitution, to protect your fellow citizens. You have a responsibility to refuse orders that you know are illegal and immoral. We need you, we the citizens of this country, of the world, because we will all sink or swim together. We need you to wake up. To those that work in agencies that have responsibility to the public protection agencies, EPA, and so many other agencies who have a mandated responsibility to disclose threats to the public, we appeal to you to please do your job. Fulfill your mandated responsibility. Find your courage. Stop helping the power structure to hide the ongoing climate engineering crimes and a lot of other things. Again, we have people in so many positions that are hiding so many atrocities, and that's the only way things can get this bad. It's not just the power structure, as I stated at the beginning of this broadcast. It's the fact that we live with so many people who have abandoned their sense of honor, the only thing that any of us own, as Seneca said 2,000 years ago. It's the only thing we can truly call ours, the only thing that cannot be taken from us, and so many have abandoned that, as if it was of no value, as if their paycheck and their pension meant more. And with that kind of philosophy, and we all have a philosophy, by the way, whatever our faith, whatever our creed, we all live by certain philosophies. And if those philosophies are flawed, and those philosophies are destructive to the whole, we can only end up in one place. And right now we're in that place. And if we continue on this course, our certain demise will follow. That's a mathematical fact. Again, if we look at what's happening around the globe as we enter 2016, the climate disintegration is going to be ever harder to hide. The atrocities of the power structure will become ever harder to hide. And as these truths become more visible, that power structure becomes more dangerous, much more dangerous than they've ever been before. We need to keep that in mind, but there's only one way forward, and that's to pull the curtain back and expose them. It's the only way forward. So, again, I ask all those in agencies to find your courage, to stop helping the power structure, to stop hiding their ongoing crimes, starting with weather warfare. And they are hiding these crimes, by the way. I personally, as I've stated in previous shows, I have been in Redding Environmental Waste in Northern California to meet with some of the people there who asked me to attend the meeting because they knew this was my area of research, and shown tests from the Sacramento River, the drinking water for Southern California, with massive spikes of aluminum that they couldn't explain and that they never disclosed. To this day, they have never disclosed that. And I would testify to that in a court of law. And I hope I have that chance soon. I do. And I know that will ruffle feathers in this area. Nothing I can do about that. There's no half-truth. Boats don't float if they're mostly watertight. And a truth is not a truth if it's a half-truth. These people need to tell the truth. Agency people, all over the globe, certainly all over America, need to tell the truth while it still matters, while there's still something to salvage. They need to stand up and show some courage. People in environmental groups need to stand up and show some courage, and I know many of them. And I'm sorry to say that so far I see a complete lack of courage, that they have chosen to stay in their comfort zones, pretending to care for the environment, while completely ignoring the single greatest environmental assault on the web of life of all. And that doesn't mean there's not a lot of other assaults on the planet. Where would we start? The human race has decimated the planet. But how can one claim to call themselves an environmentalist or be fighting for the environment when they ignore the single greatest environmental assault of all? And this is exactly what has happened. This is what's happened historically, and many of these groups are funded by the very people I just mentioned. The Rockefeller Foundation being one, part of the military-industrial complex that supplies weapons to the quote-unquote opposing sides in wars like the Bushes did, to the Nazis like our country's doing right now with ISIS, funding those who they then claim to the population are the enemy, so they can use that enemy as a tool to their own ends. So back to the environmental groups getting resources from sources like the Rockefeller Foundation. This is the case with Bill McGibbon and 350.org, one of the biggest environmental groups in the world, biggest anti-global warming group in the world, receiving money from the Rockefeller Foundation, and they will not say a word about climate engineering. Apparently, that's not good for their donations, so they don't say anything. Same is true with independent media like Amy Goodman. Many people think she is the end-all be-all of truth. But in fact, Amy Goodman of Democracy Now!, the largest syndicated independent news program, I believe, in the world, independent, receives money from the Ford Foundation, and I've been told by members of her staff that she is told, don't touch 9/11 and don't touch geoengineering. Don't touch those subjects. And she apparently is all too happy to comply because it provides a big paycheck. So she can convince her followers, again, Amy Goodman with Democracy Now!, that she's telling them the whole truth, which is a lie. There's only the whole truth or there's a lie. And she's telling them a lie because it's not the whole truth. And whatever good reporting she does, when she's leaving out two of the biggest factors of all, is deception. And we're back to the boat not floating if it's mostly watertight. It has to be completely watertight, or it's not a boat. The same theme applies in the case of the truth. There's either the whole truth or there's a lie. There's no in between. And we have countless people in our society that we know, that we work with, that are, in effect, telling lies because they're not facing or telling the truth. And this boat on which we all float, planet Earth, will not continue to support life in this direction that we are all currently traveling. So as we descend into 2016, we must all ask ourselves, what part will we choose to play in this drama that is now unfolding at blinding speed around us? Will we dedicate ourselves to the fight for the greater good? Will we dedicate ourselves to be a part of the cure? Or will we give up before even making our voices heard in this battle for the greater good? Will we remain or become a part of the disease that is tearing the planet apart? Now is the time when we decide why we're here. Now is the time when we decide what we're made of. Enough of the willful blindness, enough of the hypocrisy, enough of the false patriotism, enough of the division, denial that we have in our society over so many things. We are being played like puppets with division created by the media power structure between peace officers and the population, between white and black, and between political parties and so many other facades designed to divide us. Enough of all of that. As we march toward the rapidly darkening horizon of the new year, resolve yourself to find out what's really going on in the world. Resolve yourself to join the side of sanity and not to obediently follow or toe the line for the power structure that has so far successfully programmed society to follow their dictates. Again, clear the lens through which you see the world. Abandon your biases and preconceptions. We will all sink or swim together. What choice will you make? We all have a shared responsibility toward the whole, toward the common good. Make your voice heard while there's still yet time to salvage what's left of Earth's life support systems. This is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org. Until next week, thank you.